In this session, we're going to focus on market for medical care services. Earlier, we talked about market for resources that society has: land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, etc. And then we use these resources to produce goods and services. We call them outputs. And so markets are supposed to allocate efficiently the resources to their best use, and then allocate efficiently their output to their best use or intended purposes, and that's much of the market economy is based on. And it by and large it works for majority of goods and services we produce and consume. However, all of this assumes competition, which is the beauty of the market system. In a competitive environment, the producers that are efficient remain, and those who are inefficient are kicked out. And the consumers pay the competitive price, which is essentially price equals to basic average cost. Nobody pays above and beyond what it costs to bring the product to the market, and so forth. So, however, now in a perfect competitive market, we'll have, let's say, quantity and price. There is a bunch of buyers and sellers interact, and an equilibrium price drops out, and then individuals take that equilibrium price and supply as much as they like. In farmers market, you have a certain amount of tomatoes at this price of, let's say, 80 cents that the market is determined. You sell as much tomatoes you have today, and so forth. So this is the market supply in the competitive environment by individual seller. And then the consumers also pay 80 cents, and as long as the supply lasts and is available at that price. So essentially, both producers and sellers have pretty much a flat demand and a supply curve. Now, this is under extremely competitive market. Unfortunately, not many products we buy and consume that come to us under those circumstances because of product differentiation. Everybody has a little unique product and price it differently, and so as a result, we have imperfect markets. Some markets are heavily imperfect, meaning that sellers and or buyers have strong market power. In the case of extreme market power is a monopoly, single seller, and in the case of demand with the buyers, sometimes we have a single buyer of services, and so they're called monopsony. And so those are the extreme cases. But in between, there is a heavy market concentration. Meaning that a few large providers have majority of the market share combined, and very little room for small players and so forth. So therefore, the question is, does medical care services fall under the sort of a farmer's market kind of environment, or does it fall under providers with strong market power? Individual citizens like you and I, when we go to the marketplace, we don't have much of a market power as an individual for your surgery needs or for common cold treatment and so forth. But the insurance companies that buy medical care from the providers to distribute to their policy holders are increasingly in a stronger market position. So they dictate more or less to the providers how much they're willing to pay for certain services. And if there are less of them in the marketplace and a hospital wants to do business, they have to figure out a way to accept the price that the insurance is willing to negotiate with them. Same thing with Medicare and Medicaid. The government is a large buyer, and they can pretty much say, this is how much I'm willing to pay for a certain care. And so the providers have to kind of figure out their cost and profitability so that the price they receive is adequate. And of course, all kinds of weird stuff happens. If they don't pay you what you like to receive, then you can beef up services, sometimes unnecessary services to kind of make extra money in order to sort of elevate or boost the total bill, etc. And there's a bit of push and shove between insurance and the providers, government and the providers, to make sure that they're not charged excessively, or services that are not necessary or not thrown into the mix in order to generate additional revenue. And so that's one of the serious ills that we're trying to deal with not much success. But nonetheless, the first question is, should medical care market exist? Should it be sold? Should medical care services be subject to market forces? Meaning, people who can afford it, get it. Those who can't will go without, etc. Just like you go to a grocery store and so forth. And some societies have decided that no, this is not fair or right, and people, the countries and the country leadership will want a productive, healthy labor force so they can generate wealth. And if people are sick and are not showing to work due to health issues, obviously they can be productive and all that. So therefore, some societies have decided that the market is not the place for medical care. Canada, France, and so forth are examples. And then there are other societies like the U.S. We have kind of a mix of a market and non-market system, some governments and so forth involvement, and some out-of-pockets. We try to encourage a higher level of out-of-pocket, hoping that the consumers get involved in what they need to consume as far as medical care is concerned, and demand the better prices and or refuse treatment and all that. It's really complicated, and the debate goes on as to how consumers need to be involved at what level, given that patients will have permanently information asymmetry, lack of knowledge and understanding, and so therefore they're always in a disadvantaged position. So there are unique characteristics with a need for medical care. One is unpredictability. You don't know when you need the medical care and how much and how often. You know when you get hungry and how much food you need, but when it comes to medical care is unknown. And so therefore, to prepare for an unknown demand is extremely difficult. Now you either have to have a large sum of money dashed to the side on a separate account and be prepared to pay for unexpected, or you will be taken off guard. And that's why you have to have an insurance, like the same way you don't know when you're going to have a car accident, you just don't know when you're going to get sick. So that's why we carry auto insurance, and you don't know when a house is going to catch fire and so forth. Similar unpredictability, and that causes some difficulty in determining how much to set aside and whether you can be fully prepared for unexpected need and demand. Second problem is asymmetry of information. Patients, consumers don't have all the information. The agents, doctors, providers have more information, and so therefore consumers cannot fully be in charge of what they consume. When you go to a grocery store, you're in charge. You can look at the product, read the label. You might have had it before. You can evaluate your choices between this brand and the other, and the store brand versus the brand name product, and this kind of meat or the other, and you know your utility. So you go to the grocery store, you have marginal utility of, let's say, beef, given the price of beef, and then compare that to marginal utility of chicken, given price of chicken, and then compare that to, let's say, seafood, and given the price of seafood. And so you make sure that you juggle these things in such a way that you don't pay for the product you don't really care for tonight for the price, and you are an efficient consumer. When it comes to medical care, this relationship is very difficult to maintain. You have a certain condition, even if the physician even if you're able to listen and understand and you're not subdued or unconscious, or your loved ones, they may say that I can treat this condition with 3 different approaches, which is the marginal utility of procedure 1, given the price of procedure 1, and marginal utility of procedure 2, given the price of procedure 2, and then marginal utility of procedure 3, given the price of procedure 3. And then at the end you hear everything is white noise, so you don't know what you heard exactly, you don't have really the command of the field, and you're in disadvantage. And it's not only unique to medical care. When you go to legal services, lawyers may throw all kinds of words and you have no idea what those things mean, and you hope that they're honest and they will not overcharge you, or that they do not provide services you don't need, fill in all kinds of forms and doing all kinds of trickery. So that's why there's some good lawyers, bad lawyers. Or if you go to a firm that you want to buy a complicated heating system, you need some advisors to help you sort it out. So consumers, when it comes to medical care particularly, they cannot formulate their utility like they would do for bananas and oranges and different loaves of bread. And then if that's not bad enough, consumers don't see prices readily. For one thing, if they price, they don't know exactly what at the end you end up consuming, and there are so many price components, etc., etc. And so the market mechanism may be fantastic for a certain product, grocery store shopping and clothing store shopping, but when it comes to medical care, because of the asymmetry of information, this sort of utility theory that we talked earlier doesn't work. So we are in a sort of a predicament to figure out what to do. There's the element of trust. You need to trust the provider because there's a basically principal agency relationship. You hire someone, doctor, plumber, and so forth, they're the agent, you're the principal. They are supposed to serve you and on your behalf. However, when the agent knows more about what is it that you might need, they also can decide for you. And so therefore act on your behalf with more knowledge. And so the question is, are they making the right decisions for you? And you need to trust them. And so this gets really complicated. And because of this relationship is convoluted, there's an element of trust or distrust that emerges that is unique to these complicated products. Also, barriers to enter, meaning that providers, not everybody can practice medicine, not everybody can be a pharmacist or a doctor, a nurse, and so forth. There are particular schooling that they need to, and they have to be accredited to school and approved medical schools and so forth, and then they need to pass exams. That means not everybody can play. On one hand, that's not bad. You don't want somebody without adequate training or examination to be a player in the market. But barriers basically means left shift in the supply. This is supply, and this is supply with a barrier. With the demand, as soon as there are barriers and less players are in the market, suppliers, there will be less quantity, and what is delivered will be higher priced. So therefore, that is going to cause some distortion in the marketplace. And then payment system that with a third party, particularly insurance and Medicare, Medicaid, people don't see the prices, and so therefore they may consume more and not ask questions as to what is thrown at them in terms of mix of the resources and products for them to be cared for. And so that lack of direct pricing mechanism will basically, theoretically, can argue that causes this would be when you pay out of pocket. This would be when you have some kind of a third-party payer, so you consume more and you're less price sensitive. Now, it may be, this is economic theory, but it is true that if this is your consumption of medical care, if you have to pay out of pocket, then it's inadequate. You're walking around with illnesses, sickness, and things that hamper your productivity now or in the future. it may be that we want you to be consuming more products. If this is supply, we want you to consume this level, not this level. This is inadequate. We want you to consume more, and we want you not to be concerned about the price, because if you are, then you may forego necessary care, which happens with people without insurance, and so therefore they walk around with all kinds of debilitating conditions that reduces their productivity and shortens their lives, and etc. etc. So the fact that the third party exists and that adds to price insensitivity can be viewed as good or bad. The assumption is that if you're price insensitive, you may overconsume, and yet when it comes to medical care, people consume what the sellers recommend, if you trust them. So the seller will tell you what care you need, because you don't know what all you need is to feel well or better. So for that reason, to rely on the consumers to try sort it out and decide what's worth it and what's not worth it is very tedious process, and to expect the consumers to be in charge of it is unreasonable. The book starts the chapter with a discussion of monopoly and monopsony, etc. So you can kind of look into that. And the bottom line of a non-competitive environment is that how does it work? Here is, let's say, a competitive market where this will be the demand under competitive by individual producer. This would be the marginal cost and also supply curve. I'm sorry, and so that's where the level of output is going to be, and this would be the price. But as soon as there's a market power, you may have a demand, and then because the market power of a producer means that the demand curve they face is no longer horizontal, is downward sloping. Why? Because they become price setters. To sell more, you have to lower the price. But when you lower the price, you lower the price for everybody else before, not only the last person, but everybody else will expect the same kind of price. So therefore you have a marginal revenue curve that falls under the demand curve, reflecting that it is additional revenue comes to you that is not directly on the demand curve, because if we sold everybody the price they're willing to pay, meaning all these spots, everybody pays what they're willing to pay, and there will be no reduction, or there will not be a marginal revenue curve below the demand curve. Demand curve and marginal revenue would be the same. So what is the profit maximization rule? We said it's a marginal cost is called marginal revenue rule. As long as additional cost is less than additional revenue, you produce more until they are the same, and at this point marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. This is the level of output. How much you sell for, you trace it to see what the people at that level of output are willing to pay, and that would be a price for a non-competitive producer with market power. And so you can see that the quantities available is less and the price is higher, and that's the nature of a non-competitive environment when things are produced. When it comes to results for the U.S. healthcare system, you can look at the table 3.1. Basically shows the expenditure for a selected year in billions of dollars, and for hospital care, physicians, and so for clinician services. You can see the trend is upward for all. We also have this concern, so that's why when you look at table 3.2, when the U.S. healthcare system is compared with other major industrialized countries, Canada, France, Germany, and Japan, Switzerland, UK, across the board, life expectancy, male, female, infant mortality, healthcare spending, all that, we are lower on those basic measurements, and we are highest in terms of how much we spend per capita. Who is to blame? Or is it because we have a larger than average poor or minorities or immigrant population. No, Canada is as mixed of a society as we are. So is UK and France, and yet they manage to get more for the buck than we are, and that has been an issue for quite some time. And it's quite a struggle to figure out how to kind of wrap this up and so that we'll be more aligned with other industrialized. They're more productive, in other words. They take the same resource, they produce more with it. And table 3.3 also standardized death rates per thousand for various conditions, causes of death, and again comparison. U.S. pretty much is the bottom of this all. We have higher death rates per thousand than anybody else, with the exception of mental health, that Switzerland seems to do more poorly than we are. So that's another indicator that we're not doing well when it comes to these conditions. And then table 3.4 looks at the diseases prevalent for 10 obesity-related conditions, U.S. and 10 European countries as a whole. And again, we are not doing well across the board. So that is true. We spend more and we are less productive. And when you're less productive for the resource, it's just the price is higher than it needs to be, and that's the story that we have to try to figure out how to fix. Now, if markets don't quite function well, what that means, it means that inadequate product or output is produced, and what is produced is priced higher, which seems to be the nature of our system. We are more expensive, and a lot of people go without, tens of millions. With the Affordable Care Act, some correction has been made, but we don't know how sustainable it will be and where we go from here. But nonetheless, we still have a large number of people who still are without access. And so when that happens, we call it a market failure. Okay? There are certain conditions where the market doesn't function. One is when producers have market power. When there's strong market power, then the market tends to be functioning inadequately. Another reason is the presence of externalities or spillovers. It can be positive or it can be negative. Positive externalities is when production and consumption of certain products actually produce more value than is reflected in its private sector, in where the market exchange takes place. Example would be education. When somebody receives education, it's not only that they can privately benefit from higher income and standard of living and so forth, but society, they can be better parents, they can be better decision makers, they can do all kinds of things better than an uneducated person. And so therefore, the positive externality, the same thing goes with healthcare. If population is healthy, they are productive for a longer period of time, and they pay taxes and they pull their weight. They have surplus for the poor and the handicapped to be able to have access. So therefore, there are positive externalities associated with medical care, with education, and so forth. And then there's the times that there are negative externalities associated with certain products produced and consumed. If we consume large quantity of synthetic material, shoes, clothing, and so forth, they pollute. And so, therefore, the question is, when you buy it, are you paying the total cost, or are you just only paying part of the cost? If you go to a store and buy a radio for $5-6, does that reflect all the cost? Or there were all sorts of mining, transportation, carbon footprint that damage the environment and so forth, that is not being incorporated in the price of that $5 or $10 clock radio at Walmart. You're just only paying how much the producers privately incur and charge in a form of price plus Walmart and so forth. So therefore, there are times when a firm pollutes the river and people down the stream cannot swim, fish, or drink. And if we don't, and the firm is not picking up all the damages that is caused by those who are not involved with the production. So for that reason, we can look at it in this fashion to sort of analyze the product and the price. The demand reflects private marginal benefit. You like a product, you buy it and then you get a certain level of product and you pay a certain price, but that's privately you have a marginal benefit that determines how much you're willing to sacrifice for the price to get it. Then there is a marginal cost. This can be a private marginal cost, meaning that how much a producer will incur to produce additional units, and this will be the equilibrium quantity produced and exchanged, and this will be the price. However, it is possible that in many circumstances the production actually harms the environment, for example, or creates congestion, etc., etc. And people who have to install air conditioning and filtration so that they could avoid the smog and the poor air quality to enter in their apartments or office buildings and so forth, just because somebody up the road is just have a smokestack and polluting and so forth. So there's a social cost, marginal cost. Here is the social marginal cost. And the idea is to figure out a way to force the producers to internalize externalities, if we can. Not always possible, very complicated. If you are sick and you go to work and infect your coworkers, there is no mechanism for them to say that you showed up and I got your cold or flu and I lost 3 days of wages and I need to see some of your paycheck next month to recover from that damage. And that's the kind of thing. That's why you tell people, if you're sick, don't come, because you caused negative externalities on others and we don't know how to charge you for it, so it's cheaper for us for you not to show up than to come and infect everybody. That kind of thing. So if we kind of figure out, in some industries we have some measures of it, to force people to pick up that social cost component, so social and private combined will give you a new marginal cost or supply curve that is a total cost. And the advantage of this thing is if you can force that to happen, get the producers to not only pay for the private resources they pay for, but also the damages, then you end up at a higher price, and that pushes the consumption to a lower level, and that's what we like. That's why we post, we know smoking and tobacco have social consequences, the higher medical care cost to everybody else who's not even a smoker. You smoke, and you cause health problems for yourself, but you're not carrying all the burden. And so therefore everybody else has to pay higher premiums or higher taxes to cover your medical care for you. And so for that reason we impose taxes to somehow internalize the social cost component in a form of a higher supply with the tax type of thing. And that pushes prices higher and quantity consumed, and that's exactly what we want. We want people to consume less tobacco, for instance. And then on the positive externalities, you have, again, let's say education, price, and there's a demand and a supply, which is the marginal cost private. Here is the equilibrium, quantity of education and the price. And but we know that education has positive social benefits. This is a demand or private marginal cost. But there is also some social marginal benefit. I'm sorry, this is marginal benefit. There's some social marginal benefit associated with education. So we want actually people consume more education than if it was just strictly on a private basis. That's why we subsidize consumption, so that the true end result of a consumption of education to be higher than if it was strictly left to private, and that would be a new demand curve for social plus private marginal benefit, and so will be more education consumed than otherwise. Now, if we just left it at that, the price will be higher, supply and demand. That's why we turn around and subsidize producers of education, schools and so forth. This is with a subsidy, so that we end up with more education at reasonable price that market would sort of tolerate. And so we have a supply and demand subsidies for education. We subsidize medical schools, nursing schools, colleges, and so forth. And we also try to help some people with subsidies so that they could attend. Obviously, for primary, secondary is entirely subsidized, because imagine a society that people cannot read and write. I mean, what kind of an economy would that be? So at least very minimum, primary, secondary education is totally subsidized, and then for college, partially subsidized, and that's the idea there. So externalities, market power, those will interfere with the functional market system unless we do something. And then also the nature of public goods. Public goods, there are certain goods that have certain characteristics. One is non-rival nature, meaning that if I consume, I'm not bumping you out of this access. Public park, for instance, if I go use a park, I'm not bumping anybody else, and so therefore it's hard to price something that you cannot. There's a rivalry, and somebody has to pay higher price to get it, and that type of thing. And so it is very difficult to price products that are subject to that. Problem with non-excludability. Because private market works when I can exclude access of some group in exchange for money. So you go to a hotel and you pay and you exclude everybody else to get a key to your room. That is not possible for certain products like defense. If the Air Force or Navy protects the country, protects everybody, and then we cannot say that those who didn't pay will not get the coverage, and they can be subject to harm, and those who paid the taxes will protect them. So this basically, if we have this condition, we end up with the problem of free riders or free loaders. And so because of that, this product cannot be market product. Activities of the Center for Disease Control. If they dispatch scientists to some remote areas of the world to figure out what's causing this illness and prevent it from entering the U.S. shores and whatever, it's very difficult to say that, here you pay taxes and you will not get this virus, and those who didn't, they will, and as a result, CDC activities has to be a kind of a public good. There are certain basic research that private sector will refuse to do because they don't know whether it will be profitable, and yet that research must happen, so that we have a National Institute of Health where they do fundamental medical research, independent of whether they are going to produce profitable results in the short run or not. And much of the pharmaceuticals and other technologies and medical care comes as a result of this basic research that the government paid. But if you left it, those research will not happen, and those innovations and ideas will not emerge from profit-driven firms that they have to show profitability in a short turnaround. So that's why we have market failure for some reason or the other. So let's agree that so the question is, how much of the medical care is public good? How much externalities are present in medical care? And how much market power they have? And if we agree that the providers and also buyers, insurance companies that buy medical care on behalf of the citizens or policyholders, they have market power. Providers, doctors, hospitals, and so forth, they have market power. So therefore, some market failure is going to happen. There are externalities associated with medical care. So the market is not quite adept in internalizing those externalities and charge people what needs to be charged and so forth. And so, and the next question is whether it's a public good or is it strictly private. And there are some societies who agree that medical care is not strictly a private good, and it is, particularly when it comes to public health. We spend money and everybody benefits, whether you have insurance or no insurance, so forth. You have quality of air and quality of water, etc. And so therefore, it will have to be a public good type of thing. And so therefore, market doesn't know how to deal with those type of issues. And as we said before, imperfections in the market, medical market, come from imperfect information on the part of the consumers, patients, and that gives the upper hand to the sellers, to providers. Price transparency that is lacking. Now we're trying to introduce a mechanism by which people can see prices and ask tough questions, but if you don't understand the concepts and how you ask questions, market barrier to enter again, that restricts supply and jacks up the price, a third-party payer. All of these will result in some degree of market failure. So, if the market fails, usually government steps in, and governments try to either subsidize or act on behalf of the consumers to make sure that standards are met, quality control is there, hospital visits by the commission to make sure that they're following protocol, etc. They're not having high numbers of hospital infection and etc., and all of that. To the dismay, of course, the producers, sometimes they find it totally unnecessary, but nonetheless, at the end, there has to be some oversight to make sure that patients have some kind of a protection. And so that brings the role of government. The governments may engage in price controls, which means that if you left it to market forces, this would be the price. But this is a price that some people cannot afford, so government may put price control. This would be a market price, this would be a price government, so that, which means that at the lower price there will be higher demand, and that may be what we want. We want people to consume not this level of medical care, but this level of medical care. Except that if you left it on the supply side, this will be the supply, and that would be a demand, so the government steps in and figures out a way to subsidize producers so that the supply can meet the demand at that new level, so that we end up having the supply that is boosted through government incentives, through subsidies and whatnot, in order to meet the demand without letting the market prices to shoot up. Except that none of these things it seems to work for the U.S. And Medicare and Medicaid, they try to have some pressure on the providers to control costs and deliver lower prices. But at the end of the day, none of these things seem to work because there's still private payers, insurance and so forth, so that you shift the costs from Medicare and Medicaid to the private insurance. So the redistribution is happening, and that's why both the conservatives and the liberals wanted some kind of a healthcare reform for different reasons. The conservatives would say that it's not fair for people with jobs and insurance to pay higher premium to cover the cost of poor and the elderly. So therefore, it is a burden that they shouldn't be carrying, and some kind of national health insurance is a right thing to do, and that gave rise to Massachusetts Governor Romney, who agreed to introduce statewide health insurance, although he was trying to remain honest that if he had become president, and yet at some point he had become convinced that it was the right thing to do. The liberals argue that we need the coverage for everybody because it's the right thing to do, and it's not based on the burden of the wealthy or non-poor. It's just that everybody needs to have access to medical care. Again, both end up in same end, but from different ideological kind of perspective. And of course, we can have government failure, not only market failure, but government failure. Government failure is just poor decisions, misallocation of resources, etc. that can happen. What happens as a result of either incompetence or corruption. People are not making good decisions, they don't have the skills and so forth, or they're corrupt. They just basically funnel resources into activities that benefits certain people that may help to re-elect. A lot of projects we call bridge to nowhere. Bridge to nowhere projects are just that they're bringing engineering and talent and scientists and so forth, put together some project, then at the end everybody knows that this will not be a useful thing, but doesn't matter. Let's get money coming and get people hired and have economic activities going on, and those people turn around and vote, and you get re-elected. But at the end of the day, the resources were essentially misappropriated. So we have that problem, and democracies are supposed to, if not eliminate, at least minimize this role of corruption, but it seems that we're not making much headways. The power of lobbyists who are heavily involved in writing the legislations will allocate resources sometimes to the disadvantage of the consumers and the citizens and so forth, but to the advantage of the corporations and their profit levels and all that. So we have that problem, and when it comes to the sort of democracy index, you have the Scandinavian countries that are on the top in terms of accountability and good governance. And then we are somewhere in the middle of the pack in terms of good governance and level of corruption. And then you have these countries like Somalia and Zimbabwe, and those are at the bottom of the pack where everything is corrupt, nothing functions. There are failed states or some maybe other developing countries where everything is so skewed that almost nothing is decided on its merit, and everybody is sort of horse trading kind of environment. So the focus of the chapter 3 is essentially to first understand the market and market mechanism, and what is the nature of the competitive market, and how medical care is not necessarily a competitive market for a host of reasons, market power externalities, public good nature of things, and then the asymmetric information on the part of the consumers, and barriers to enter and so forth, that causes all kinds of market distortion. So we know that much is true with medical care industry, and the higher level of concentration and consolidation is happening on both buyers and sellers, not on the part of the individual patients who need medical care, but insurance companies are consolidating so that when they go in the marketplace to buy medical care on behalf of their policyholders, they want to be increasingly, commanding position to dictate how much they're willing to pay for certain procedures to the providers or certain medical care. And then in reaction to that, the providers are consolidating so that they would say that I'm the sole seller of these procedures or this medical care, and that's the price I require, and I will not deliver below that. And so therefore, they get into a push and shove and all sorts of negotiated prices and market segmentations, meaning that different people working for different employers may have different coverage and pay different prices for the same thing. And all these prices are kept secret so that two employers buying insurance for their employees may be paying different price, but the insurance doesn't tell them who's paying how much because they break the market into small segments possible and charge everyone the maximum they're willing to pay, and so at the end of the day, that leaves a lot of heavy questions as to whether the medical care needs to be market driven, more co-payments, more co-insurance, getting the patients to refuse if it costs too much, medical care accounts, savings accounts was introduced to make people to set aside money and shop for the care they need, and hoping that they will ask tough questions and refuse unnecessary services. We have an industry that is driven by fee for service, which means that the seller throwing everything on the kitchen sink because they all generate revenue, some of it unnecessary, related to the care, but as long as the system is driven by fee for service, more services are provided without scrutiny, because again, when we talk about economic efficiency, you look at the marginal cost versus marginal benefit. You go to the store, you like an apple, that's the marginal benefit of an extra apple. You look at the price of it, that's the additional marginal cost. You decide if it is worth it, and you're in if that happens. But when you have all these problems with the asymmetry of information and so forth, people don't know how to evaluate the marginal benefits and marginal costs, which the price is not observed. So, and to the degree that you can actually make bad decision and yet not suffer the consequences, you have less incentive to make sure that your decisions are scrutinized and tolerate the market mechanism. To give you an idea, imagine there's a market territory. There are 4 pizza places. And then somebody decides to plop themselves in the middle of this thing and sell pizza for let's say $15, and they calculate on 300 customers per day. And imagine that they miscalculated and they're getting only 150 customers. Well, can they turn around and say, well, let's charge $30? No, because nobody pays you $30 for a pizza, because everybody else on average paying $15. You screwed up. You don't get the market. You don't belong to this crowded market. Miscalculated, and so therefore you close and get out. You suffer the consequences. Poor decision, you suffer the consequences. When it comes to medical care, let's say same market territories, an MRI 1, MRI 2, MRI 3, MRI 4. 4 providers. This one is 50% capacity, this one is 80% capacity, this one is 45% capacity utilization, and so forth. This is, let's say, 75%. And you go plug yourself in the middle in here, and there are excess capacity all around. You invested the money, you were counting on, let's say, 10 patients per day, and everybody will pay $1,000, and you're not getting 10, you're getting 5. You need to charge $2,000 to have a right return on investment. In the case of medical care, if you are not doing well, you can still jack up the price because these are necessary products. Patients cannot determine how necessary they are. The third-party payer pays for it. So even if they are running inefficiently and there's excess capacity all around you, you can still plug yourself in there and enjoy. Now, that's why we have certificate of need by state authorities to make sure that if there are excess capacity before they authorize additional provider or supplier, that these resources are fully utilized to bring the average cost down. And if the demand still exceeds from the maximum utilization of these resources, then they authorize additional resources. If they didn't have a certificate of need, then too many providers jump in and all running below capacity utilization and all passing on those waste to, from the higher prices. CEO of a major hospital chain, 13 hospitals, from educational teaching hospitals to community and so forth, said that in one street of St. Louis, there are 9 imaging technologies, and in Canada, the whole province has 1. In Canada, they have 1 of that technology for the entire province, and everybody needs to travel there and so forth. In the US, 1 city and 1 street has 9 of those. And you can imagine that either they're overused, meaning that people are receiving treatments. In fact, one physician, you can look it up in TED Talk, I think it was Albuquerque, if I remember it, and somebody asked us how many CT were performed. Nobody knew the numbers, but eventually they figured out there were 50,000 CT scans for a city of 300,000 in the year they looked at. 50,000 for a city of 300 CT. And you can imagine that how much radiation and overexposure for citizens of this population, so there will be future consequences, externalities, negative externalities, and the question is how badly they needed to use the CT scan so readily and so frequently. So the question is who has the power and ability to have an oversight to make sure that resources are allocated properly, they're priced properly, people have adequate access without overpaying, etc. And that is the problem that is plaguing our system, and the debate rages on. So the focus of the chapter 3 is market mechanism and the failure of the market that you need to understand, and then hopefully this lecture will help you to sort things out a little bit better.